Welcome to Talk Advocacy to Me, the podcast that dives deep into the world of customer advocacy and loyalty. I'm your host, Liz Richardson, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, Deena Zenyk. We're the co-founders of Captivate Collective, and we're here to spark your curiosity and fuel your passion for all things customer advocacy. Each episode, we tackle hot and pressing customer engagement topics for the advocurious to the seasoned pro. So let's dive in and talk advocacy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talk Advocacy to Me after a bit of a hiatus, which we'll get into. I am Liz Richardson. I am your host, former founder of Captivate Collective with my trusty sidekick, Deena. Zenyk, Deena, why did we have a hiatus?
Captivate got acquired by Spotlight.
Captivate got acquired by Spotlight. So we are now leading the customer engagement team over at Spotlight with several other practices in order to bring a very holistic offering to our clients, which is very exciting. And it's so fitting that our first guest after this acquisition is someone from Spotlight who brings a wealth of additional knowledge to us, which I'm so excited about. And I'm so excited. Yeah. It's you, Jaylan. Jaylan Adlam, welcome. We are so excited to have you. Jaylan is the Associate Director of Customer Engagement. And fun fact about you, Jaylan, which I will just sneak out there because you know I have to. Jaylan is a reality TV star from the past. So we've got that. But I'm going to pass it to you, Jaylan, and just say, what else should people know about you before we dive into our really fun topic?
Yes, other than my what am I, a Z-list celebrity status, whatever's under Z-list. But yeah, I as the associate director for customer engagement here at Spotlight. I've been at Spotlight now 5 years. And been working in actually a lot of kind of adjacent spaces. So consulting background for sure. I've had now 9 years consulting background. But more recently have gotten to work with our Spotlight's research and intelligence team, which is the team I actually came from prior to the acquisition, and prior to joining the customer engagement team, where we were doing a lot of work already with a lot of customer data, but general data. We worked a lot with analyst data, research information. And so now my focus is a little more honed in to the user reviews side, which from what I understand,
brings us to our topic today. Yes. So I've had some good talks with Jaylan, but we've all been talking about reviews for a lot of the last decade, I should say. So whether you're in customer marketing or analyst relations, this is like very much a shared responsibility and, dare I say, pain point, which brings us to our title, which is why does everyone secretly or not secretly hate sourcing reviews? But, spoiler alert, they're not going away. In fact, they're more important than ever. So we're going to get into that. But let's unpack this. Like, why? And I know you've heard it, Deena. Deena and I were presenting to some live audiences with both customer marketing and analyst relation folks in the room. Reviews comes up, universal groan throughout the room. Why do we all secretly hate review sourcing? What has done this to us? What do you think, Jaylan?
I think it's super funny that even we at Spotlight thought we were getting out of user reviews. Verbatim from our CEO Rick was, that's user review sourcing thing. Yeah, we got to find a way to get out of that. Only to now turn around and go, yeah, we got to find a way to invest more in that. It's not going away. I think a lot of the pain points come from it's a final outcome. It's a measurement that doesn't actually, I think, always tell the full story. Many people are, of course, outcome focused. How many reviews? Volume. And that's not the full story. There's so much opportunity, I think, with user reviews that isn't prioritized or isn't aware. The CEO doesn't always know these additional pieces, and you have to sometimes try to speak to um, what all the value really is here in terms of
Mhm.
user reviews. Um, Many people, when focused on the outcome, you lose a lot of those other areas, but you're being provided a lot of information.
Yeah,
A lot.
there's so much goodness to it, but you're correct in the sense of Deena, I think we were even saying not that long ago, let's go back like a year. Oh man, I think that reviews have run their course. Like
I think I said
this
on a Tatum podcast, Liz, that I was putting a stake in the ground that I thought that reviews were dead.
yeah,
Hmm.
and
I,
like,
I, I was wrong.
but dig into that. Like, why were you saying that? Why were you saying
Well, I
reviews?
think that reviews over like the last 10 years just really devolved into a bizarre vanity metric.
Mm,
If you're vetting so hard that you only want your happiest customers to go out there because you don't want to impact the star rating, what is it that you're actually learning in that motion, and how are you measuring the value of that? And then, you get a bad review come in and everyone bad. There's no such thing as really a bad review. Like, it's knowledge,
mm,
right? You take that knowledge and you either adapt or you ignore it. And so there's even this sense that, people didn't even want to really hear what their customers really thought anymore. It was just about
mhm.
gaming the system, which
Right.
felt very inauthentic and felt, for me, I think a year ago when I said that, it felt very time limited. Like, if we're just focused on, we just want 5-star people. We don't really care what they have to say. We just want that star rating. We just want the badge. That seemed to be kind of, I think, kind of on its moving towards being on its last legs.
It's so true. I think like the original idea behind reviews being, hey, this is how buyers will go through the
Mm,
process. They will come to these third-party review sites where there will be credible reviews. A lot of that because of the gamification around badging and around
yes,
reporting really
yes.
turned that on its head because then organizations became it became a scramble to ensure that the ratings were kept. And so really then the practice wasn't about getting so much the focus
Mm,
about getting authentic or varied reviews to help buyers purchase. It was really about convincing any potential purchaser that this absolutely was the right company and that we were doing that mostly from a ranking perspective, not maybe from an aggregate perspective.
mhm.
Because you're reading one by one in a review, but the ranking itself is supposedly that aggregate. So I agree. Deena, what is it about 5-star reviews and then everyone needing to game it? Well, if everyone is gaming toward 5-star reviews,
Hey,
it's a
look, and,
little
and
bit
gaming it so much that one of the regulatory boards in the US had to come out with rules around gaming reviews. I mean, it was just so pervasive, right? That you would be hard pressed in SaaS to go to a review profile and not be viewing a highly curated
different.
view of
Mm,
how people are experiencing that company, which for the buyer, the actual buyer, is not useful. So, to your point, Liz, who did reviews become useful for?
Yeah.
But it was kind of just a mirror back into the business, which is a vanity metric.
Yeah. I think we've seen this get uh, toxic to all kind of levels, right? We've seen some game it all the way to the point of just using AI purely to even write the reviews and generate reviews, thus leading to a lot of these user review platforms having to have additional moderation processes and reevaluation of are these even legitimate customer reviews?
mm,
Because so many were starting to see it that way that you lost any of the learning function out of it, I think, and it became very much this is marketing, this is brand awareness, and this is ultimately a representation of our brand. So we have to have this positive message out there. Any negative review is thus seen as an entire negative on the company and a stain on the brand. So you have
Mm.
to constantly manage this. Um, I don't like that it's gotten there. I know through a lot of the clients and potential clients I've worked with, we've lost the ability to really sell the learning side of a lot of it. Clients don't often come to us being open to learning from the user reviews. uh, they go, can you help us get 5-star reviews?
Yeah, that's absolutely the focus. And I think one of the other tiring things is just kind of the never-ending nature of it. Like you mentioned, Jaylen, it's like it's never done. You never have enough reviews because you're constantly in competition with other brands to continue to source these reviews. But you do have a finite amount of customers, especially people without large, huge customer bases, and so that creates a lot of just tiredness sometimes, I think, in the practice of, oh, it's just a never ending task, it's never fully done. But so there's good news and there's bad news, right? There's good news and there's bad news. So if you hate sourcing customer reviews, the bad news is it is now definitely not coming off of your plate. It's definitely not coming off of any brand's plate, to some degree. And I'm sure most of our listeners are aware, AI has completely resurrected the importance of the research sites, of these sites. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to necessarily pull back the gamification, or that, like you said, Jaylen, it's just an extension of your brand and how you look. So it's now a marketing effort to make sure that these reviews look very polished. What are you, as we think about AI and how it's changing the game, what do you think are some of the biggest ways reviews are now going to play into that?
Where we're seeing a lot of the data start to point to is that it relies a lot on the narrative. What are these broad narratives that these LLMs, these large language models, are picking up? And ultimately, where's that narrative coming from? Now, fortunately, a lot of these LLMs, they rely on trusted sources the same way a person would, right? We want to see some sort of verification. This is why, for the most part, we usually see verified sites like Gartner Peer Insights, G2 come up the most often. Um, because they do have that verified process, making sure that this is an actual customer. Has this person actually had experience using the product or platform or service? So you start to see that be a reliable nature within user reviews. But I think a common actually misconception for a lot of people is that AI is going through and reading the actual individual reviews. That's not actually often the case that we see. They're usually looking at a lot of the aggregated pages, those that either provide the rankings and a short kind of blurb over what the maybe pros and cons of this product are. So it's more of those short listicles rather than the actual in-depth reviews. So that's why it is starting to go back to what's that overall narrative. One of the things I think is interesting there is it actually has brought back a little bit of the learning piece, because now you have to know, okay, where is it pulling that information from? What narrative is on those sites or those areas where it's pulling information from? Okay, and then how do I go about trying to control or help promote the correct narrative or correcting a narrative that's there, in order to help our brand?
I think what's really something positive, I think that's going to come out of the machine now, taking reviews as a main source and then feeding back, like you said, Jaylen, that narrative. I keep using that word, narrative, narrative. The good thing is you can't just go chase 5-star reviews. I
Mhm.
mean, you can, but if those reviews don't have any depth, if they don't have any specificity, if they don't answer questions that buyers would be asking during the buyer journey, they really don't create a ton of bearing on that narrative inside of the LLM. Whereas very specific feedback, maybe on a 3-star review or a 4-star review or a 1-star review, those may come into play much more strongly because the LLM is reading that it is giving useful information. But it also has the ability as a machine to look across all of these reviews at once and aggregate and make sure that there is consistency in that voice, as well as consistency with the other channels, because it's not even just looking at reviews, right? It's going to be pulling all those narratives from externally that it's deemed as expert input. And so there is some good to that, right? We can't just go chase the 5-star review that says, I absolutely love this company, they are the best.
Yeah, and even if you start to chase those 5-star reviews, one, it's some of the good nature that I do love about customer reviews is it's dynamic, right? You can think the world that you've made and maybe a huge impact with this customer, and that they're over the moon about you, and they very well might be, and still have cautionary feedback for you. I always bring this back to personal relationships. It's a way to kind of ground in it. And somebody you love the most, they're still going to have some critical feedback in ways that you can improve or things that you can do better. And it doesn't mean they don't love you. And so, not always will you get a 5-star review. Sometimes you get a 4 from somebody who really does care, but it's because they want to see you improve. And that's how they're letting you know that they care. I think one of the most interesting things now is that this push has been towards advocates, promoters, and it's absolutely why that's the case. But what I think is actually interesting is there's still a very unique learning opportunity there based on a lot of the information that the customers are providing within those reviews, where they're often asked not just what do you like, but what do you dislike? What's not working for you? What is a potential reason for churn? Why wouldn't you recommend this client or this vendor? And if those are your promoters and they're still giving you that kind of feedback of what you need to improve on, it's actually super powerful because hey, even the people who love us most, they still have this feedback. I think more should be open to learning because if you take that and compare with those who are maybe frustrated with you, is the feedback the same? Do you have some of these same areas that show, hey, for some, it's not a complete detractor, but potentially it is? And how do you maybe shift some of the measurements and what you're looking at and learning from those reviews? I think it's very important. So
Mm.
I would say that's certainly a positive is there is a continued learning opportunity throughout those user reviews for sure.
Um, I want to reedify here. Is that a word? What did I just make up a word, Jaylan?
That's how words work, I think. You
I
get
don't
to
know. Okay.
I'm all about re-edifying. I'm here for
I'll
it.
clarify. Yeah.
I do want to, before we get into maybe how this should change the way we think about sourcing reviews, um, and just in case we have some listeners, we do want to solidify here that reviews are playing an outsized role. So if we didn't make that clear, we do a lot of AI analysis at Spotlight. We are looking constantly at the source of the narratives when we do prompts, hundreds of different prompts across a buyer journey. Where is the source of that narrative coming back? And reviews are typically number one or number two as far as the source that is being pulled to help create that narrative. So to repeat, we cannot walk away now. Like we are in this game. Hopefully the game maybe for a slightly different reason, because buyers now are going to be using those third party reviews very, very, very heavily because it's going to be so easy. They're going to be in those LLMs. They're going to be asking their questions as part of their buyer journey, and it's going to bring in that lump narrative, and reviews have an outsized place to play in that. So as we think about that, as we think about, hey, it might be just as important that you have one really negative review over here that's getting pulled into that narrative, even though you have 55-star, they're great reviews over here, and that's not being pulled in as much because maybe it doesn't have the detail or whatever it might be. How is that going to change the game for review sourcing is what I want to talk about now. So, we've talked a little bit about this, Deena, on the road lately from a holistic perspective of how LLMs and AI are going to change the customer marketing game. But from a review perspective, what do you think immediately comes to mind when we say, okay, but they're not going away? But how should we change then the way we're thinking about the activity of sourcing them?
Yeah, I think that the big mind shift is not thinking about who's going to give us 5 stars, but thinking instead of who is going to share the 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 narrative that supports the picture that we want out in the market. And if you take that from a customer marketing perspective and you have to kind of back that up and think, well, how do you shape a narrative?
Mm-hmm.
How do you educate a set of customers or your entire customer base around what's important to your business? Is that actually important to them, or is it just important to us? How do you curate that to show up in the review? So I think it is changing. Right now there is a lot of transactionality. Is that a real word?
We're making up words today, so it doesn't matter. Yes.
Transactionalism.
I think
Um,
yours is better than mine.
there's a highly transactional nature to a lot of review sourcing, right? Our inboxes have them all the time. $10 gift card, go do a review. We're not even saying what we think you should be focused on in the review
Mhm.
necessarily. It's just, here's a software product. Can you go do this review for $10? That piece is going to have to become much more strategic so that you are taking your customers on a journey with whatever that narrative is that you need to be showing
Mhm.
up in the LLM. So long story short, less about the stars and more about what is this person actually going to say.
Yeah, it's like their need to actually understand the subject matter. I think an easy example that I've been using with a lot of folks lately is you might have a narrative about the onboarding was long, strenuous, not great. Maybe that is a narrative that is coming up
Mhm.
in aggregate in the LLMs. And so then how would you then combat that? How would you shift that narrative? And so thinking about even review sourcing as a life cycle motion,
Mhm.
what do we need to be asking people from a review standpoint right at the end of onboarding? And what's the criteria? Who do we want to ask that? Who do we
Mhm.
want to ask that? Of course, we want to ask the people who've had a great onboarding experience. How do we know that? Where is that data coming from? How do we then make sure that they're prepared? And what do we want them to talk about on that review? We want them specifically to talk about the onboarding because we need to create that narrative and make sure that onboarding questions are answered when people ask about onboarding inside of the LLMs. Jaylan, I see you. Yes, this is resonating with you as someone who's done a lot of review sourcing.
Yes, you're speaking exactly to what we call the triggers
Mm-hmm.
um, within the customer lifecycle. It's one of my favorite things to try to help our clients align to. Um, Once you have a lot of that in place where you've identified what are the appropriate triggers, it's much easier on you to now go drive the narratives you want to drive. So Liz, you mentioned it right. So say if we're getting feedback, and this is why it's an always on motion,
Mm-hmm.
have to constantly be learning and understanding what the narrative is out there. Um, because if you do say have a function of or a message around long onboarding, guys, we're constantly getting dinged for this long onboarding process. We're maybe losing deals within sales because they hear how long it's going to take before they can be active. We have to go change that narrative, especially if it's one that we don't believe is true. Hey, we've improved this process already. But one of my favorite things, and I think it goes back to why I loved my certification. Am I? Hopefully, that's not a big salesy on my part. But I loved the CAP certification because one thing it gave some great articulation to was what you all talked about of DNA, the ability to discover, nurture, and activate. And many of our clients can discover, they can activate, but and I think this is to what you were speaking to, Deena, the nurture part is where you bring them along that journey. So the fact that you understand who your happy customers are and you can get them to leave a review, if you didn't nurture them, they may still have old ways of thinking that you've actually gone through and changed. But because you didn't nurture that relationship and talk to them about the innovations you're making, the changes you've made to onboarding, they can't speak to it. They don't have the ability to articulate, they don't have the ability to say things the way maybe you would want to speak to it in a business or the language you would want out in market. We saw this come up in a lot of different ways in some of our AI research, where the tool, the AI tool you have embedded within your solution, it has a cute pet name, and it's not being picked up. And it's because, well, when your customers talk about it, they're calling it a pet name and not maybe talking about the AI tool itself. They're just calling it by the cute name you gave it, and it's not being correlated. And if you're not nurturing your customers to talk about, hey, this, XYZ tool is our AI software, and how to really bring that narrative home, you completely miss the mark sometimes. If you don't talk to your customers about how your onboarding process has changed, they'll continue to share that information that the onboarding process was long, and they won't have the ability to say, Well, a caveat is, well, they've actually revamped that now, so it's actually probably a lot better. They can't go put that narrative back in market for you. And so I really think that nurturing piece is one of the integral parts of being able to help change that narrative. You have to do it. You have to bring your customers along in your journey.
Hmm. I think narrative can mean a lot of things. So, like Jaylan, from an enablement perspective, I just talked to someone today and they were like, so do we like educate them on how to give a review? And I said, absolutely, right?
Yes.
You can bring your customers along if the relationship is sound and the relationship is good. And I think across that life cycle, if we think about, hey, for different narratives in the buyer journey, people are going to ask about pricing, they're going to ask about the sales cycle, they're going to ask about onboarding, they're going to ask about success with the tool, metrics and impact from the tool or the service, whatever it might be. And so that idea of needing to have that always on engine of identification of who should be telling this story, who could tell these stories, who could answer these questions. And we do want that segmentation and awareness of, well, are they the correct role, of course, in that interaction, but also, are they pleased? Did we have a great experience? Are they the right people to help speak to this narrative? And we can think about nurture in another way as well, which is why. Again, I think you'll have to ask across the entire journey, why would they do this for us? Why would they go out there and do it? And of course, there are some manual and transactional ways to reward people for coming along. We really also prefer, you put the money in the piggy bank before you ask for the ask. So if you're thinking about asking people for reviews at the end of onboarding, what have you put in the piggy bank? Well, hopefully they've had an amazing onboarding experience, and that goes to customer experience in general. But also, what's the secret sauce of the little give that you're giving beyond just your normal interaction with that client? Onboarding at one of my previous companies, when they finished their onboarding, we would have a final call with them in that onboarding process. And we started putting these really fun backgrounds, like where as soon as they came on the video, there was like balloons coming down and confetti coming down. And it was just like a little bit of a launch party.
Mhm.
That's a very simplistic example, but it surely does. That's the surprise and delight, the seeing them, the celebrating them could go a long way in that milestone moment to create money in the piggy bank that then feels natural that they would want to intrinsically pay that back and be able to celebrate that they thought this was a great experience. So all of that to just say, that idea of life cycle and how you're nurturing along the life cycle, and then how you're able to find and identify the right people to tell those stories that will come up in the buyer process. This is fun stuff, in my opinion. Like, this is really strategic. This is way more fun than just like, hey, let's pay for a G2 campaign and they're going to randomly go out to this list of customers, pay them $25, and hopefully they're going to give a review. This is way more rewarding as a practitioner, I would say. Jaylan's agreeing, Deena, you're agreeing as well. And yeah, because we've all done the random campaigns. We've also done really, really fun transactional in the moment campaigns. Those aren't going away. Events aren't going away. People are really happy at events. They're willing to give, so there's always these things, but we now need really varied narratives to fulfill all those questions in the buyer journey.
And I think that's one that when you look at it, it's the measurement tools, right? What tools do we have to measure those different places within the life cycle journey? So at onboarding, do we have maybe a measurement tool where we're either sending out a brief survey asking how was your onboarding experience? If you're looking to identify those who had a good onboarding experience, hey, maybe yeah, let's see what narrative they can help us drive, right? So we want to change that narrative. Oh, those who had a great onboarding experience, let's promote them. Let's see if we can convert them into leaving a user review. Let's again find ways to nurture them along that entire journey as well. But it's those measurement tools, and those are internal tools, so that you can purely use for learning, give you
Mm,
the data that you need to understand. Okay, discovering the right folks, nurturing
mhm,
them through the right narratives that of what we're driving, how we view things as a business, and then activating them and empowering them to just go help promote that narrative out in the market for you.
mm. I love it because Jaylan, you just described like what we call here at Spotlight the customer intelligence layer, which gives you that data across the customer journey. And then there's the identification, which is okay, these people are able to speak to this. They're the right person at the right time. And hopefully they're advocates to some degree. We're able to identify possible advocates at that time. And then there's the nurture and the activation. And then this system is your engine, so that you can turn that engine any which way you need to at any time, because the narrative is going to change. That's the hard part about AI, especially right now. That narrative is ongoing, always changing. By the way, you also need to know what's being said about you in the AI, which comes down to AI visibility and whatnot. So all these things play together for this much more strategic approach as the buyer journey is completely changing. Okay, what I want to do here in the last 5 minutes, because Jaylan, you're a wealth of knowledge and you worked with so many organizations on review sourcing, on specifically, I know you are very much an expert on GPI, and I think we're going to have to do a GPI session at some point. But so Gartner Peer Insights, for those of you who don't know, and G2, we do a lot of that as well. So I want to do some rapid fire. So Deena and I are going to rapid fire you with a few questions here for our listeners around reviews. If they're just learning, oh my gosh, how do I just do review sourcing better in general? All right. So Deena, I'm going to let you start with our first question for Jaylan. What do you want to ask him? What's a rapid fire?
Rapid fire. G2 versus GPI. Is it the same strategy for both, or are they very different?
Not the same strategy for both. Similar, but actually pretty different.
Mm.
GPI works mostly at the market level, often identifying the market categories your product may be listed in. G2 is a little more to the product level, so looking at it kind of in reverse and what does your product really sit. But very different strategies for both as well. Gartner Peer Insights, you are a little more okay with campaigns running more shortened campaigns, voluminous campaigns. On G2, it's a little more effective to use a drip campaign approach, where you have more of a steady trickle of reviews that come in. They have actually different review decay processes. So Gartner has a 12-month full weighting to their user reviews, and then an 18-month 50% weighting. So you have a total life cycle of 18 months, 12, and then a 6-month 50% period. For G2, it actually has a consistent decay model, where month over month you actually see a percentage decay. So that's why drip campaigns better there.
Good
Can I
one.
sneak in just an extra question here on G2 versus GPI? Can you ask customers to go in and update their reviews on G2 and GPI?
Yes, you actually can. This goes right back into the, hey, have you been nurturing your customers along the
Yep.
journey? And maybe is there something that you either resolved for them and maybe there was a fix that they can go back in and correct? Yeah, absolutely. Customers can go back in and correct those.
And then
Oftentimes they have to be prompted by you to do
yeah,
so, but they do have that ability.
would that refresh the decay process?
So for Gartner Peer Insights, if you do a review after 1 year, you can refresh it and it is reevaluated as a new review. For G2, I believe it's the same process that after a year it can be refreshed as a new review.
Cool.
But during that early decay period, no, technically you're just updating the review.
Yeah. See. Facts. All right. So a big question I think people are asking right now, Jaylan, is does volume matter?
That's a good one. Yes, it does matter, but also no, it doesn't fully. It's not the only thing that matters, or it's not necessarily the most important thing. We've been saying it that narrative really does matter. I'm a big promoter. We at Spotlight here as well. Quality over quantity. You do need a healthy volume, right? It does matter if one person says you're good. All right, that's not enough to convince everyone that they need to go with you for sure. However, you don't necessarily need 1,000 people saying it. There is a give and take to the volume market. Typically, what we find, higher volume, you do start to get much more mixed sentiment, as you're typically starting to get a mixed use case, and not always is that all your strengths. And so there is a kind of a Goldilocks zone of enough volume with the right people to drive the right narratives.
Mm.
It also depends on your market. Some markets are maybe more competitive, and you might have some competitors that just have a ton of customers, and maybe you do have to compete a little bit more, especially if outcomes like badges and things are of high desire for you.
Okay, a tack on question to that would be like, so when it comes to volume and reviews, well, this isn't a tack on question, it's a question all on its own. Analysts, how are they using reviews? Because I know specifically we're talking, Gartner here.
Yeah.
They went back and forth on what was important, what was giving the ranking. How do analysts use reviews as part of their ranking?
So up to at least this is certainly the Gartner description. It is at analyst discretion, so many of them will use it differently. Always a suggestion: use your relationship with that analyst and ask them how specifically they use user reviews or customer reviews within their evaluation. What we do typically here, most analysts are looking more at the narrative, the aggregated narrative that's being driven. Does it contradict or does it match kind of what their preconceived notions are or what their research is already telling them? There isn't, we do have some analysts who very much look at the scoring, and they're trying to establish kind of that ranking. So if you do fall specifically behind in your support score over others, they may call you out for that as well. Even if the narrative isn't written often about your support, but your scoring is much, much lower, you may see write ups about that as well, especially if anecdotally they've gotten information about that from other areas.
Okay, Deena, last quick hit question.
Ooh, I love this question. All right, Jaylan. Raffles versus direct incentives, and I would say versus no incentive. What are
Uh,
your thoughts there?
yes, that's an interesting one. So raffles, I so much controversy with raffles. I will keep it I will keep it a
Well,
bug.
let's explain real quick for any audience members by what we mean in raffles. Raffles, one way to get around like saying you're incentivizing a review is to say, hey, if you give a review, we're putting you in a general raffle for a prize. Okay. So you're not guaranteed any kind of exact transactional reward, but you have a chance at something. So, okay, go ahead, Jaylan.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag around raffles. I've heard verbatim out of a customer that we were helping promote a raffle that they were like, "Nah, not for a raffle. Nobody ever wins those things, and I'm never gonna." So they almost saw it as no incentive, and like, "Oh well, I'm not really gonna actually get anything, and so this is a way for you to kind of get me, and then I get nothing out of it. You use my hope against." However, some have been very adamant about enjoying raffles and the kind of chance. Those were mostly our Vegas user conferences. Did they like the raffles? Something about gambling in Vegas. Um, I would say direct incentive is probably my personal favorite. Um, and I think it depends on the audience. I think if you're just kind of making an ask and haven't necessarily done a lot of the nurture piece, you should provide an incentive. I know I certainly ignore whenever I'm asked for reviews. If there's nothing in it for me, I'm like, oh, you just want data from me? I think I'll take my time. No, thank you. Um, I think the no incentive has a value and a use case in there is already an experience being provided elsewhere. We've done a lot of that nurturing. And so this is just really kind of something we've already done a lot for you and we've done a good job doing a lot for you. Would you mind doing this for us? And I think in those manners, you can find that if you were to add an additional incentive, you may kind of cheapen it
Mm.
by saying, "Oh, we don't just trust the relationship. We have to, throw on this little incentive that, especially if you're working and then trying to incentivize the CEO of another company to come write a review and you're trying to give him $25, probably give him no incentive and just make sure his experience has been good.
Yeah.
Let's get the incentive there."
Absolutely. Sometimes also giving that incentive, technically, you're supposed to say that. And so then you get into a lot of human psychology of like, do we believe reviews that are qualifying that they have been incentivized to give that review? I don't know. Go to your own Amazon shopping and figure that out. I personally skip them, but some people still find them very valuable. And then as we look at AI, again, another game changer, because will AI care? Or is it just going to be collecting that narrative? And again, people won't necessarily even see that disclaimer. I think there are so many questions, and it's a really fun to try to figure these out. It's really fun to be on the leading edge of trying to figure out all of this, and how we as humans will change how we pretty much do everything from an AI perspective, especially in B2B, or greatly affected here in that buyer journey as well. But, it is not going away. Are we all in agreement? This is not going away.
Agreed.
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 Okay.
And excited for the reframe of
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, and maybe it might be a little bit seen now. We can all look at this with a little bit more like, okay, this is not just a slog. It's not just a necessary evil. It's
Mhm.
actually a highly strategic play now, if you're thinking about it in the right way, and if you can get to that level of thinking about it as a narrative and needing those pieces of the narrative across the customer lifecycle, so that you're ready for all that buyer journey, those questions, and that the way that narrative is going to get shaped through the LLMs. Pretty fun stuff, guys. Pretty fun stuff.
Super.
All right.
Thanks,
Well,
Jaylan.
Jaylan, thank you so much for being our first guest after our major hiatus. We're so happy to have you and all your expertise. If you aren't already following Jaylan on LinkedIn, he is a wealth of review knowledge. So hit him up. I'm sure he'd love to connect. We will see you next time on Tech Advocacy. To me. Bye, guys.
Bye.